Good morning, guys. I'm here joined with Boris. Before we get started, we need to take a selfie real quick, if you guys can join us. I'm going to take one real quick, all right? All right, here we go. Everyone say cheese. Just kidding. Okay, we have 40 minutes joined by my amazing friend, Boris, who doesn't need any introduction, but in case you haven't heard of him, he's the head of Claude Code. I'm a director of product on the dev infra team here at Meta, supporting our AI developer productivity stuff. And we're going to just have a friendly fireside chat to chat about a bunch of different questions that we have for Boris. There's a QR code, I think that was shared up screen earlier or somewhere. We are going to have a later portion of the talk to be open mic. So I have an iPad here with a bunch of questions that you guys are submitting. We'll go through some of those top voted questions. But as you guys are going to fill those out, I want to quickly ask folks, how many people here use AI to write their code? Just a quick raise of hands. Okay, good amount of people. Keep your hands up though if 100% of your code is written by AI. Let's look around the room. How many people is that? Okay, it's a lot more than before when I asked these questions. So it's really kind of an interesting time to be here talking about this stuff because all of us are witnessing this transformation in our industry. And so I think we're going to get this question started. I'm going to have a few questions that I'm going to start off first. And then as you guys fill this out and vote on the top questions, I'll get to those afterwards. So just a few quick warm-up questions. Boris, how many lines of code have you written this year?
How many lines of code?
Yeah.
So I pulled the answer for this in prep because I knew you were going to ask that question.
Yeah.
Okay. So 1.7 thousand PRs. Added 400,000 lines, deleted 250,000 lines. So
okay.
I think last year it was actually I deleted more than I added. But this year I added a little bit more than I deleted. And I also tried to get the token count. Unfortunately, the data kind of gets deleted due to retention and stuff. But since March, I used 8 billion tokens.
8 billion tokens. And so those lines of code that you deleted and added, those were all written by you or Claude Code?
100% of my code has been written by Claude Code since Opus 4.5. So that's like November of last year.
That's crazy. And then do you use your phone or your laptop? Like, what's the split nowadays when you code?
Yeah, this is sort of like the craziest thing. Like, I would not have predicted this if you asked me like 6 months ago, where are we going to be doing our coding? But yeah, like most of my coding now is on my phone. I would have said you're crazy if you told me that 6 months ago, but yeah, here we are.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Okay, I think one of the questions that a lot of people have been pinging me about and we really want to get your thoughts on is really starting to think about like efficiency and ROI. We kind of like hear of Uber and other companies starting to set like monthly budgets, for example, like $1,500 per engineer. But at the same time, Anthropic, you guys, and other frontier labs are pushing out these more capable but also more expensive models. What do you think about this? Like, what are your thoughts on how companies should balance this tension between like more performant but costly models versus like having to start to demonstrate more efficiency, token efficiency?
Yeah, totally. So, like luckily I get to talk to so many companies every day, that are, our customers and kind of future customers. And broadly, people think about it in two ways. Some companies think about it in terms of the cost. And other companies think about it in terms of ROI. And I'm like, ROI is absolutely the right framing because you don't want to just think about cost because you kind of spend something on it and you get something back. When you think about ROI and kind of like deploying Claude Code in general, I think it's useful to think about like what's a really good way to deploy it. And I think like the most successful companies we've seen, they sort of give everyone tokens, not just the engineers, but also like the product managers, the designers, the data scientists. They give everyone tokens and let the company experiment to see where the ideas come from. Because often it's just like not the person that you would expect. Often some of the most interesting ideas and the most innovative like ways to improve processes and kind of like new product ideas, it's gonna come from like, like an accountant somewhere in the corner of the org or like a marketing person that you've never heard, that the CEO has never heard of. That's where a lot of the innovation comes from. It won't necessarily be like the most senior engineer always. And so I think for this reason, like you kind of want companies to experiment, and you want your team to experiment. The way to do this is give people tokens and give them safety to experiment, so they feel like they can try stuff and they're not going to get kind of penalized for it. Once you find these internal use cases that kind of work, then you want to control the costs. And you want to do that on the back end, not on the front end. And like once there's some use case that takes off, uses a lot of tokens, then you want to think about how to like optimize that. There's all sorts of ways, like like in Claude Code, we have like per seat cost controls. There's ways to use like advisor models. You can change the model for your entire company. You can control the effort level for your entire company. You can set budgets like based on department, based on RBAC. So there's just like all sorts of ways to do this. I think maybe like the second way to think about it. So this is kind of like the deployment side and like how to actually get it out and like when you're like at the very beginning. Once companies have been using Claude Code for a while, you really do want to think about ROI. And like for ROI, there's kind of like two parts. There's the investment and there's the return. In the past, the way that, investment is easy to measure, that's just tokens. Return, in the past, the way that we used to measure it is what % of the code is written by AI, or maybe like % increase in the lines of code or something. And yeah, like, we just saw a bunch of hands go up that said, like 100% of your code is AI. So once it gets to 100%, how do you actually like measure that return? And that's where it gets kind of hard because, like we worked on DevInfra back in the day. And, like on DevInfra, like if you have like a percentage, like 2-3% productivity improvement for a year, that used to be like pretty good. Now the productivity improvements we're looking at are, like hundreds of percentage points. And at Anthropic, we've seen like a 8x increase in code per engineer since the beginning of this year. And so like in this kind of regime, how do you think about the return? And so I think part of it is get to 100% of your code written by Claude. Then think about how much is the code per engineer accelerating. And then the third thing to think about is like, what are the other bottlenecks that are getting in the way? Because once you get it to this point where engineers are just like writing a lot of code, the bottleneck is going to be like good ideas. So how do you kind of unhobble that so that your company can generate ideas faster? And this could mean like more PMs or user researchers or something. Then you have to think about how to get these ideas to market faster. So this is kind of unhobbling on the GTM and on the marketing side. So this is kind of roughly the order that I think about it in. And when I look at our customers, everyone is kind of like a different step of this adoption curve.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting to think about, like, kind of how you said, it started with coding and just getting more and progressively more hands up, whereas like 100% of their code is AI. But then you start to realize there's upstream and downstream bottlenecks to the ultimate thing that companies want, which is delivering more business value. So like unhobbling those ideas, getting code to be deployed faster and safely and more accurate. I think those are all the things that the whole industry is like figuring out. It's like, okay, let's say coding is like more or less largely getting solved with AI. What are the things now that's blocking coordination and collaboration? I actually see one of the top voted questions is about that. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But I think that's like the interesting question we're in now. It's like a year ago, if we were doing this fireside chat, we'd be talking about like, how can we use AI more for coding? How can we sort of like do all that? But now it's kind of like the next question. It's like, okay, what's next now that coding is more or less going to be more and more just written by AI? So I think that's a really interesting situation that we're in right now. All right, next question I have. So for context, Boris and I actually used to work together on Threads. So of course, and also Threads just hit 500 million monthly actives yesterday, we announced.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I had to obviously ask some folks on Threads for some questions. I have one question from there I want to pull out. It's actually from our ex-colleague, old colleague, Peter. He asked, like, is loops the next hype cycle or is it real? Maybe you can explain what loops are for maybe people who aren't familiar with it and then how you use it personally.
Yeah. Have people here tried loops, routines?
Still pretty nascent, yeah. Not
okay, and just so I know like how technical to make the explanation, raise your hand if you're like an engineer that codes. Okay, so I think like for the engineers in the room, the way to think about it is 2 years ago, we wrote source code by hand. We started to transition to make it so agents write the code. And now we're transitioning to the point where agents are prompting agents that then write the code. Or maybe that's like the less technical explanation. The more technical explanation, like actually my mental model is sort of like if like source code is like kind of like the basic level, that's sort of like a statement in programming, then the agent writing the code is like a function in programming, and then loops are like a higher order function. So it's sort of like we're stepping up the abstraction ladder. It's one more
Moving
step.
up. Yeah.
So loops are sort of like as big as the step from source code to agents was. Loops are the step from agents to the next thing. It's just as important and as big a step. To me, it feels like right now in the world of like loops where, I don't know, like maybe where agents were like a year and a half ago. So it's still like fairly early, but we're starting to see signs that it's working. And the idea is like, okay, let's say as an engineer, a lot of my work is to do code review. And so like one thing that I could do is like, I could do the code review by hand. The other thing that I could do is I can have an agent and I can prompt my agent to do the code review. The loop version of this is I have an agent that's running in a loop that does all of the code reviews. Or like another example is, like I read threads to see like people's feedback. And so like I could do this by hand, or I can have an agent do it, or I can have an agent that's constantly looping over and every like 5 or 10 minutes reading the feedback and putting up PRs for the fixes. And so like like a year and a half ago, we were kind of at the first step, now we're kind of at the third step. And so like when you think about all the work that we do as engineers and all the work that, like non-engineers do, like designers and data scientists and, like marketing people and so on, a lot of the work, I think we can probably chunk up into loops in this way. And I think we're starting to get to the point in the industry where like a bigger and bigger percentage of the code is like expressed as loops and a bigger percentage of the work. And so for me personally, maybe at this point, like 30% of my code is written by loops on an average day. If I try really hard, I can get to like 100% for some days, but it doesn't totally click yet.
Nice. I feel like if we ask the question of how many engineers write loops, maybe in a year from now, we'll see more hands. So in some ways, you're always like just kind of living the like 3 months, 6 months ahead of the rest of the team here. And so like I think loops is something that's been fascinating too internally. I think people have been starting to explore what are the various ways you can orchestrate all the various tools you need to kind of create this sort of like automatic loop. Because like right now, humans are in the loop, right? You have to be every single part of the way. We were just talking about in the first question how to kind of like get this sort of process more and more automated. And so getting this loop going is really sort of like the key to figuring this out and getting more productivity. The other thing we've been talking about for a while is that Anthropic's been investing a lot in co-work as of late. I'm pretty sure a lot of the audience here primarily uses Claude Code. I think it'd be great if you could tell us sort of like why folks here should use co-work. What are some of the use cases you're most excited about? Especially related to the first question we talked about, just like how people are using it beyond just coding.
Yeah, totally. So for folks that don't know, like the way that you try co-work is you download the Claude desktop app. That's the same app that has chat and Claude Code in it. It also has co-work in it. So you just download it. You can use it. Works on Mac, works on Windows. Co-work is Claude Code for non-engineers. It's just Claude Code under the hood, and it actually uses the same like Claude agent SDK that Claude Code is built on. So the infra is the same, and you can actually build on the SDK yourself too. It's exactly the same thing. The reason we say it's not for it's for non-engineers is there's a bunch more guardrails built in. So co-work has like an entire virtual machine. It has this like actually quite sophisticated isolation, and we like hook into the operating system to make sure you don't accidentally delete stuff. There's a lot of protection for prompt injection. There's all sorts of things that we do that are make it a little bit harder to shoot yourself in the foot. When I think about how I use co-work, I actually use it for everything that's like non-engineering. So like one example is I use it for project management. And so like we used to have stand-up every morning where we talk about here's what everyone on the team did. And now actually what we do is I have co-work, and it opens up this like spreadsheet in the browser, and the spreadsheet has essentially like all of the work streams for the week. And it'll message every engineer in Slack for me automatically to ask like what's the latest status. And often their Claudes will respond.
Claudes, agents talking to agents.
It's like the Claude's talking to the Claudes.
Yeah, Claude.
But sometimes like engineers will respond, and then like co-work sees this, and then it'll fill out the status in the spreadsheet. And all this is like co-work will open a browser and it'll do this for you. It's like zero setup. You just need co-work and you need the Claude Chrome extension, and then they'll just kind of work together to do this. So this is like this kind of magic of combining tools. And I think that's like this like magic moment that people see when they use co-work is like, oh my God, this thing can use my tools. And it can combine all my tools for me in the way that I would. And it just feels incredible. It feels like using like a AI chat app for the first time. It's like a revelation. There's this like more sophisticated usage. One thing that I used to do is I would use co-work to book all of my travel. So what I would say is like, okay, here's like my itinerary. I need to be here on this day, here on this day. Can you like go out and book the plane tickets for me? And again, it would like open a browser and it would go to this like, travel site that we use to book stuff at Anthropic. And it would just like fill it out and book the tickets. And what I've done now is I've actually automated it a little bit more. And so what Co-work does now is it has a scheduled task where every day it'll look through my email, it'll look for any events that I've accepted on my Google Calendar. If the event is in a different location, then like it's not in San Francisco, it'll go and it'll automatically book the tickets, and then it'll send it to me. And it'll book like the tickets. It knows to book like hotels, and it knows all my like flight and hotel preferences, and it'll just do this automatically. And so like I was just in Tokyo for Code with Claude, and then I was in London and Berlin for Code with Claude before that, and it just fully booked all the tickets for me. It was this like multi-leg like flight and hotel thing, and it just booked everything. I wasn't involved at all.
Intervene at all?
Not at all.
Everything.
Yeah,
Wow.
it just like it found it in my email and it booked it after I confirmed.
It's crazy. Okay. Yeah. I mean, how many people here has tried Co-work? Just curious. It's a good amount actually, right? Hopefully more. That's great. I think another question that I got a lot of pings about, would love to hear your take on this, is that many of us only got access to Fable for like maybe 3 days or so. So while we wait to hear what happens next, like, obviously I'm assuming you had access to it for much longer. Share maybe some of your experiences with how you use Fable for coding, and like, now you guys have a family of different models. How do you think about using different models for different software engineering use cases?
Yeah, totally. And like first of all, like with Fable, just want to say from our point of view, it's a misunderstanding, and we're working to hopefully get it back really soon. The way that I think about Fable is, with coding, there was this moment back in November of last year. I don't know if everyone like remembers this, but everyone started like posting on Twitter and kind of talking about like how good the model has gotten at coding. And what happened is Opus 4.5 came out. And the leap from the previous model to Opus 4.5 was so big that for a lot of people, they just started writing all of their code using Claude for the first time. And that was actually the moment for me where I just uninstalled my IDE because I wasn't using it anymore.
Wow.
And so like for me, that's the same moment when Claude started to write all the code. The leap from Opus 4.8 to Fable feels to me like a leap of at least that same size. And I think it might be even a larger leap in model capability. For me, Fable is, it's just like, it has this like nuance and dimensionality and kind of like way of thinking about things that is kind of like similar to like my smartest coworkers. It's not just like a blunt instrument the way the previous models were, where it doesn't understand nuance. It's actually like really able to grapple with a problem. And this is useful for all sorts of things, from like data analysis, because there's a lot of nuance there, and you have to understand like, you have to ask why like 3 times to get to the bottom of a question. Fable just naturally does this. It's useful in debugging, where you have to form a hypothesis and you have to kind of like chase down that hypothesis, look for evidence. It's able to do this really well. And for coding, I feel like I actually just ran out of hard problems to give it. Like I just couldn't think of a harder problem. Like every problem that I gave it, it essentially one-shotted, or maybe like few-shotted with a few prompting, with a little bit of prompting. I just kind of ran out of hard problems, and this is something that I heard from a lot of the team also. So yeah, it's like it's quite a big step.
Is Claude Code just basically 100% written by Claude Code at this point?
Yes, that has been the case again since November of last year.
Oh, so it wasn't even like with Fable, it was like with Opus 4.5.
Yeah, with Opus
Around that
4.5. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true for Claude Code. That's true for Co-work. It's true for an increasing number of Anthropic's products. I think across all of Anthropic, 80 to 90% of the code is written by Claude Code on average. But actually, for a larger and larger share of teams, it's just 100%.
I also heard that Fable is like more expensive, but it's also a little slower, but it's also like incredibly intelligent, like you said. How do you just use Fable for like all of your tasks, or do you drop down to like Opus or Sonnet for different kind of use cases?
Yeah, I use Fable for everything.
Just like Fable for everything. Is it because Anthropic has no budget? No.
So, like at Anthropic, we do actually think about token use, right?
Yeah.
Like, like we essentially make the tokens.
Yeah.
But they're not free for us, because every token we use is a token we do not give to a customer.
Right.
So there's an opportunity cost. When I think about it, it actually maybe comes back to ROI. So like when you think about kind of ROI for something like Fable, you can reduce the investment maybe like 50% or something if you use like, Fable with an advisor model, or, use Opus by default and have it call out to Fable when it needs. So there's like all sorts of ways to optimize usage, and as new models come out, you have to kind of keep tuning the way that you optimize this usage. It's actually quite a bit of work to keep up with it, and to keep that, you have to like run evals to make sure it works pretty well. Although, like you can use advisors. That's kind of the recommended out-of-the-box approach. But I actually think that if you think about ROI, there's probably like 50% chance to reduce the investment, but probably like 1,000% opportunity, or even 100,000 or 10,000 whatever percent opportunity to increase the return. And so what I would think about is just use the most expensive model and focus on how do I get more out of it? How do I increase the return? Do not focus on cost cutting. It's just like it's so early in kind of like the adoption of this technology to think a lot about this. And you probably want to spend like some effort on cost cutting, and like you definitely want to make sure costs are under control and kind of well governed. But I would focus almost all your effort on increasing returns.
Yeah, focus on the upside more than like the potential downsides, essentially.
Exactly, because there's so much more upside right now than there is kind of like room to optimize the downside.
Yeah. Hopefully, the rest of us get access to Fable soon, so we can kind of all explore that as well. Okay, I think we got a decent amount of questions. Actually, there's 107 questions. We're obviously not going to get through all of them, but I'm going to handpick and kind of like MC some of the top voted questions that we got here. So Andrew, kind of the top voted question here is saying, what is Claude Code doing to improve collaboration? Currently, it feels like a solo work product with only awful things like GitHub for working with others. Wow, that's a interesting question. What do you think?
Yeah, we have a bunch of stuff on the fire that we're cooking up. So hopefully we'll have something there soon. In the meantime, the thing that I would recommend is use an MCP to hook up Claude Code to Slack, or to Teams, or to GChat, or whatever you use for collaboration.
Sounds good. The next voted question was, since agents can do most of the code now, where should engineers focus most? Kind of touched on this earlier, but yeah, curious.
Yeah. So, like as we think about like what engineers do, one of the things that we do is coding, but we do like a lot of stuff that's not coding, right? So we do, like talking to customers, coming up with ideas, jamming on stuff with designers and PMs, doing data analysis, figuring out what to build next, aligning with other parts of the org. There's just like all sorts of things that we do as engineers. I think over time the model will be able to do all of these things better than we can. We are not there yet. And so I think in the meantime, like the model does the coding, but someone has to prompt the model. And figuring out what prompt to give the model, there's actually like a lot that goes into that, right? Like you have to kind of figure out what's the next thing. You have to do the market research. You have to talk to your team. You have to do all this other work. So yeah, it's kind of all these other things.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, with loops too, that's also progressively moving up the abstraction layer, where maybe at some point, for some certain cases, you don't even actually need a prompt. And so I think it's interesting, like I said earlier in this conference, is like we're in this like transformational stage. We're all figuring this out together as an industry. We also have seen at Meta that, like you said, it's actually a minority of an average software engineer's time is actually spent coding. It's all the other things that kind of happen upstream and downstream with it, whether it's like managing your code deployment, or if it's like collaboration and working kind of like in docs and planning. And so I think this is kind of like where like Claude and other apps and products for AI is just thinking about how can we just accelerate the whole development lifecycle. This is something that we're largely solving now with coding, and we're going to continue doing so. But then the upstream and downstream parts of the development lifecycle is still the thing we're discovering.
Yeah, and like coding, I think was always the minority of the time, right? And
it's always been, yeah.
And for me, it's like sometimes it's like really fun to code and like write a bunch of code by hand, and then sometimes it's just like a total slog. And like I never wanted to do it by hand in the first place.
Yeah.
I hear an engineer laughing. Yeah. And so like like sometimes like when I don't have Wi-Fi on like an airplane or something, I'll still like write code by hand, like just for fun. But it's actually like not something that I personally really miss. It feels to me like Claude Code is just like this like jetpack where like as the model gets better, I get like more jets or something in my jetpack, and I can go faster and faster. And at this point, I'm like purely bottlenecked on how fast I can prompt. And most of my prompting now is actually just like audio, like talking to Claude, and being bottlenecked on good ideas. But coding is just no longer the bottleneck.
Right. And this is kind of like what a lot of conversations have been about. It's like, what is the role of software engineering? It's like less and less about the coding aspect and more about sort of like how you supervise these agents, how you sort of manage the agent end to end, and help generate and productize some of the ideas that you have. I think related to that is like, with the explosion of AI generated code, everyone's just like writing code so quickly now with AI. How do you or Anthropic sort of like handle the downstream impacts of that? So like with code review, right? Like I think a lot of companies require a human code review. That paradigm may or may not be actually breaking or shifting because of the increased supply from upstream. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah. So when we think about code, essentially like you write code and then it gets to production and then hopefully it drives a business metric for you, like revenue or usage or whatever it is that, like whatever business metric you care about. When we think about this process, there's all sorts of different bottlenecks, and the biggest bottleneck used to be coding. We've now solved that bottleneck, and at Anthropic and for a lot of our customers that have adopted Claude Code for a bit, they're getting to this point also. And so like now we're thinking about the next bottleneck, and for us the next bottleneck was code review. You write a lot of code, now someone has to review it. And our answer was to build a product for this. And so we built this product. It's called Claude Code Review. It's available to anyone. You can use it. It is the exact same code review product that we use internally at Anthropic for every single pull request. It is different than any other code review product on the market because it's a lot more expensive. And the reason it's a lot more expensive is it uses a large number of tokens to fully automate the code review. So by the time that I see a pull request as an engineer, there's essentially a guarantee that all the bugs have been caught. And it's not, it's not 100%, we're still working on improving it, but it's like, like 98, 99% of the bugs. So like when I look at the code, essentially like I'm not looking for bugs anymore. I know there's no bugs because Claude caught it and Claude fixed it. The next thing is like, is this a pull request that should exist? Is this a good idea? The next bottleneck for us was security review because you're landing all this code, you need it to be secure. Like agents can introduce vulnerabilities the same way that people can. And so how do you make sure the code is really good and secure? And the answer for us is the Claude security product. And again, like we build this internally to solve our own problem, to solve our own bottleneck. And what it does is every week we run it and it scans over all of our code bases, it finds issues, and it fixes them autonomously. And we're actually at the point now where we do red teaming and we do penetration testing for like every big new feature launch to make sure that it's secure. And we're actually getting to the point where Claude security is catching issues that even pen testers didn't catch.
Oh, wow.
This didn't used to be the case. We've had this product for a bit, but because of the model with Opus 4.8, it's now starting to get to that point. And so, like this was the next bottleneck. And so, we solved it. And again, we make this available to a product so customers can use the same product too. And this is just like the Claude security product. And now we're thinking about the next bottleneck. And the next bottleneck might be like idea generation. It might be like optimizing CI to make it kind of scale better. And so like, for example, a thing that I did last night is I noticed that our CI was a little bit slow. And so what I did is I had Claude Code run, and I said, use a workflow to look at my data, look at real CI timings from, from the data set, and optimize CI to make it much faster. That was my prompt. That was the entire prompt.
That's it?
That's it. It used a dynamic workflow, which is this new feature that we launched a few weeks ago, where essentially the model kind of orchestrates dozens, hundreds, thousands of subagents dynamically. It's essentially like it's a new form of test time compute. And it used, I think, something like a few million tokens, and it ran for like a few hours. And it produced 4 pull requests that reduced CI time by 50%. And so I landed those last night. And this is work that would have taken days or weeks or months in the past to do all this kind of profiling. And this is just like it's just the next bottleneck, and we can use Claude for it too.
That's crazy. So basically, I mean, the way you just described everything since we started is like, just keep going after the next bottleneck, keep going after the next bottleneck. So far, the base model is just just has the underlying capabilities to be able to progressively solve it. So that's really cool. I think it's actually a good segue into the next question that I wanted to ask, which is like, what is the next big thing for you and your team? Like, what is your vision for the next year? I mean, you kind of mentioned like just solving bottlenecks as you come across, but like, what is the vision for Claude Code over the next year?
Yeah, so, okay, as a caveat, we plan on like a weekly or monthly cycle. We don't have a 1-year plan. The space is changing too fast. Like the exponential is crazy. You have to hang on and plan like a little bit at a time. Broadly, the direction for us is very similar to the direction from before, like from the last year or from the last 2 years. We want to be the most capable agent. We want to work anywhere. So wherever your team works, Claude works. You don't have to like switch to our full stack to use it. And we want to let people experience the capabilities that the new model brings in a way that other products don't really let you experience. And this is something that we realized a couple years ago. Sonnet 3.5 was quite a big leap in coding, but we felt like there weren't really a lot of products that let you fully experience that leap. And so Claude Code was like a way to get at that. The idea was like, okay, no more source code. You're just using an agent. That's the way that you experience this. And as we think about the model over the next few months, over the next year, it's going to get even better at long-running work. Like Claude is already by far the best at long-running work. That lead is going to increase, I think. The code is going to become more secure. It's going to become higher quality. And the model is going to become even better aligned. So whatever your intent is as the user of the model, as an engineer or a product manager or a designer that's using the model will be even better at expressing that intent. And so like we're going to be kind of like looking at these capabilities. We're going to be looking at like what are the products that we can build to let people experience this in the easiest way possible.
Nice. Reza asks a question here that I thought was really good too. Coding in large-scale projects is not the biggest problem. Maintenance is. How should the code be maintained in long term? Like, how do you guys deal with maintenance?
Yeah, so it was something that I've been experimenting with is actually using like loops for maintenance.
Loops for maintenance. Can you share more?
Yeah, so one example is like you can have Claude Code running in a loop to be like look at the code base and improve the architecture, or look at the code base and find places where the test suite is flaky and improve it, so to get rid of the flakes. Or find instances of tests that are not useful that we can just like delete. Or like look at the code base, look for duplicated abstractions and unify it into a single abstraction. And so these are actually like all loops that I have running.
Like in those cases, do you check or review what the code does before they delete or make any changes, or you're just they just send out PRs and you're just like reviewing them after they run the loop?
Yeah, it's the second one. So I just look at the PRs.
You just look at it, the change after they made it.
Exactly. Okay. For prompts like this, it's actually like quite easy, I think, for Claude to kind of wrap its head around these shape problems. So it's usually quite good if you use the latest model. And if the result isn't good, all you have to do is say, like look for opportunities to improve the quality of the code base, and then just add the magic words, use a workflow.
I thought you were going to say make no mistakes. I thought that was
maybe that would work too. But yeah, it's like essentially like just say use a workflow and it'll throw more test time compute at it and it'll give you a much better result.
Yeah, that's really cool. Workflows is a pretty new concept. I think I saw an announcement about it. I don't know how many people here are familiar with it, but it seems like another one that we should be watching out for. Like, is there a quick summary of the difference between workflows and loops, or is it kind of like the same thing?
Yeah, it's fairly different. So the way I would think about it is, like there's these traditional scaling laws in AI. And there's this like scaling laws paper a while back that kind of introduced this idea that the way that transformers scale and the way that LLMs scale is it's a function of the data, the size of the neural network, and the amount of compute that you use to train the neural network. And so like this is this kind of exponential property of the model. This is why intelligence keeps increasing exponentially, is because of these three scaling factors. Over the last couple of years, what's happened is we've actually added a fourth factor, which is test time compute. And essentially what this is, with test time compute, is actually just a fancy way of saying how many tokens does the model generate. That's it. So there's a way to like make it so the model can productively generate more tokens in order to achieve a better outcome. There's a few ways to do this. One is effort settings. And so for Claude models, there's like low effort, medium, high, extra high, max. This is a way to configure how many tokens essentially you want the model to output. This is tuning the test time compute behavior. The more tokens, the better the result. The second way to do it, which we just introduced, is dynamic workflows. And this uses Claude to essentially write a little kind of like program that's running actually in a virtual machine to orchestrate other Claudes to solve a problem. It's a new form of test time compute that we're still just exploring, but essentially it's a way for Claude to launch dozens, hundreds, thousands of agents to get work done.
Wild. Awesome. Okay, next question. What are some of the hard problems that Fable has had a hard time to solve?
Yeah, I think that our models are not perfect, and there's a lot of places where they still need to improve. One of the places is product sense. So I still come up with better product ideas than Fable does.
So idea generation.
Idea generation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not there yet.
I see that. Okay.
Its code is now better than the code I would have written. Its front-end design is better than my design. Another place where I think I'm still a lot better than Fable is distributed system design. So kind of thinking through what are the services, how do we organize it, how does data flow, how do we think about load factors and things like that. This is a place where I think Fable is still, there's still opportunity to improve it.
How many more months before that's not true anymore? Or weeks? Or days?
I don't like giving predictions, but I would say probably by the end of the year, it'll be quite good.
Okay. All right. We heard it here. We're approaching the last few minutes, so I'm going to probably close this out with this last question here. This is a question from Andrew. He asks, how do you prevent engineers from getting lazy and accepting everything they output in Claude?
There's a couple ways to think about it. One, I think there's maybe two parts to this question. I think one part is, how do you make sure that the output is really good and that people are kind of doing the right thing? One way we think about this is, how do we get Claude to do the right thing so you don't have to? And an example of this is, since the beginning, we've had these permission prompts for Claude Code. And, the prompt, anytime Claude wants to run a command on your computer, it asks you, is it okay to run this, yes or no? Can I run this bash command? Can I use this MCP? Can I fetch this URL in a browser, yes or no? And an engineer sitting there has to approve it or decline it and say yes or no. And something that we found is, over time, it felt like you get kind of a little lazy. And at least for me, I just kept saying yes. I wasn't really reading the commands. And I'm sure this is kind of true for a lot of people. I don't know if you admit this to your boss, but and so our security people actually saw this, and they were like, hey, there's a human in the loop. The goal of that human in the loop was to improve security. But actually, what's happening is that it is hurting security because people are just they have this prompt fatigue. They just keep saying yes without actually reading the details. And so the thing that this led us to build is auto mode, which is a new permission mode in Claude Code. This is what we use internally at Anthropic, and actually now the vast majority of our users use it also. And what this is every permission prompt we route to a model, and the model decides yes or no based on what you've said so far in that conversation. And not only is it more secure, and we've kind of shown that the results are better than dangerous mode and better than the default yes-no permission mode because of prompt fatigue, but it's actually kind of one less thing I need to do as an engineer. And so the thing that it unblocks is very long-running agents. Because you don't have to sit there saying yes or no, it means I can now run Claude for hours or for days. And there's all sorts of benchmarks that show that Claude is the best at these kind of long-running tasks. And of course, there's years of research that went into making auto mode working, because that made it work. Because if you look at Claude models, they're essentially not resistant to prompt injection anymore. They're not susceptible to prompt injection anymore. And this is a thing that I think surprises people sometimes. But if you look at our system cards, the success rate at 100 attempts is around 1%. It's just by far the best in the industry. And when you take this and combine it with a prompt injection classifier, which we run for a large share of traffic now, essentially the models are not susceptible to this kind of attack anymore. And what this enables us to do is ship auto mode. And what this means is that as an engineer, I don't have to sit there and say yes or no. So this is, I think, part one answer to the question, which is let Claude do more and figure out how do you unblock Claude to do more safely rather than trying to control yourself. I think the second thing is kind of what is the feeling day to day as an engineer when you're not writing the code anymore? How do you still learn? How do you still stay in the loop? And actually, one thing that I found really powerful for this is output styles in Claude Code. Whenever any new engineer joins our team, we tell them to use the exploratory output style. So this is just /config output style equals exploratory. You run this in Claude Code, or you can ask Claude to set this for you. And what it does is that anytime Claude will make a change, it'll explain to you, hey, here's how the architecture works. Here's how this language works if you haven't used it before. Here's how this part of the code base works. It'll explain to you so that you can learn. And then there's also a learning output style which you can use, and this is for people that are not coders. And it'll explain to them, hey, here's like how this language works. Here's like, you know, like at a very basic level, it's going to teach you how to do the thing instead of doing the thing. So it'll say, okay, in JavaScript, you know, for example, here's how something works. I'm not going to make the change for you. I'm going to walk you through it. Step 1 is open this file and edit it in this way. Step 2 is run this command. Okay, I see you've done that. Step 3 is do this. So actually, I think like output styles and using Claude even more are a super powerful learning tool. And it helps me as an engineer kind of understand what's going on even as our stack changes, as our infra changes. And especially when I'm working in new languages.
Awesome. Well, we're at time. It's been, like I said, it's a very interesting time in our industry, and it's been a privilege to have Boris here working on Claude Code share some of his thoughts. And yeah, let's give a round of applause to him. Thank you so much.
Yeah.